Hello. Today I want to talk to you about developing a really simple approach to self evaluation that you can apply to just about any project or program that you're about to start or even where it's in the early stages. If you can get ahead and think about evaluation at the very beginning, it can really simplify things for you and make your life much easier when you come to check in points along the way and reporting deadlines and that kind of thing. So I'm going to share a simple framework and I'm going to give you some advice around some of the best ways really to strengthen your approach and make it as strong as possible. So the first thing I really want you to ask you to think about is why you are wanting to evaluate. So these are some areas that you might want to think about by yourself or with others to help you explore that. So the first is about understanding and reporting an impact. So this is often the one we think about most commonly because funders or people within our own organisation want to understand what our project and programme has delivered, the impact that it's had, and how it's performing in a sense. The second element that we often want to think about as well in evaluation is understanding about the way you've done things, so what's worked and what hasn't. So we sometimes call that process evaluation, and it's also really important alongside the outcome focused evaluation, which I'll mainly focus on today. The third thing we don't always give as much time to as perhaps we ought to. Evaluation and the work that you do around it can be really important as a tool to help you and those you work with learn and improve what you do. So, thinking about how you might want to create some time and some space to have conversations about that, to look at the evidence together, and to think about how you might apply the lessons from that into how you develop or grow a program or activity, or decisions you might take about whether you keep going with it or how it might evolve. So I'm mainly going to talk about outcome focused evaluation here because it's the bit that people find trickiest, and it's the bit that in many ways is most important for the conversations we have with funders and so on. There are three key terms that it's very useful to use around an evaluation framework. You might use these as headings, or you might use them as column headings as well if you want to do something in a tabular form. But if you have these three elements, you're really covering the main things you ought to have in terms of an evaluation. So the first is about setting out the outcomes, so the changes you intend to bring about for people or communities. We've actually got a separate resource on the language of outcomes. So if you want to develop some outcomes or refine the ones you already have, you should go and have a little look at that resource. The second thing is what I would describe as indicators. Some people talk about measures. Indicators are what we will track or gather to know if we've been successful. So they're directly connected to your outcomes, or at least they ought to be. They don't have to be perfect measures. That's why we call them indicators. They're things that help us understand if we're on track. So they don't have to be really perfect. It's about getting a rich selection of different things that help us understand and indicate to us whether we're on track. And the third thing are your evaluation methods. So these are how you will gather your evidence. And you should also think about when you might do that. So at key points with individuals, for example, or at the 6 month point of delivery, whenever that might be. And also who you want to try and engage with your methods, because it's really important to try and select methods that engage people in meaningful ways. So, for example, sometimes a survey of parents might capture parents that are much more vocal. But if you're trying to reach what I would describe as some of the quieter voices, you might need to take a much more deliberative approach and try and reach out and do some interviews or some discussion groups or something like that. So you want to think about the methods that are best for your group, when you might use them, and how they relate to the outcomes and the indicators. I'm an independent evaluator and I've done lots of this work over the years. And the top four things that I would say you should think about to try and strengthen your evaluation practice or develop a really strong evaluation plan is first of all to think about trying to have a nice mix of number-based, so we would call that quantitative, and softer or more qualitative evidence. You might want a mixture around each of your outcomes. Some of your outcomes might be really quite difficult to measure in a number-based way, and in that case, it's fine to have softer, more qualitative methods or ways of gathering evidence, like views, ideas, experiences, and so on. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. I would encourage you to take what I would describe as a thoughtful approach to sampling and gathering evidence. So thinking about some of the barriers that people might have to engaging, and also trying your best to get a broad sample of people that are involved in your activities. It's really important to try and gather data from a range of different people and on a range of different experiences as well. So it's about that richness and diversity. The more of that you can bring to your evaluation plan, the stronger it will be. I would also really encourage you to try and look at processes and methods that help you gather evidence in really simple ways and to allow you and anyone else that's involved in that to do it really consistently. Sometimes we make evaluation too complicated, and then it becomes very difficult, or people get quite tired of being involved with it, whether that's about supporting people to complete things and participate, or in terms of the participants, sometimes we ask them a lot of questions repeatedly. So it's all about balance, and I would definitely encourage you to try and keep things as simple and consistent as possible. When you're thinking about questions you might ask and the evidence you might gather, I would encourage you to try and think about who you're speaking to or gathering that from and what it is specifically you want to ask them. I'm going to talk about two things around this. One is to try and explore some of those more qualitative views and experiences. So we're often quite good around numbers, but the softer stuff's really important. So you might gather some of that from participants. You might also want to gather some evidence from people who haven't participated or who have dropped out, which is much more challenging, but actually often an important part of the jigsaw puzzle. Where you're talking to individuals that have been involved in a project or programme, it can be really interesting in terms of evaluation to look at their wider circle. So, for example, if it was an older person that has been participating in something, you might think about their support workers or their family members or people like that might be in their circle. Again, we're looking for that richness and diversity of views. We don't want to do that with everyone all of the time, but it can work really well if you're doing something more detailed, like a case study. You should also think about your partnership organisations. It's not something you have to do all the time, but gathering the experiences and the views of partners in terms of your outcomes, so what they've observed, the impacts they've seen, that can be a really valuable lesson. If you can do it around your outcomes rather than just asking them for feedback, it means you can be more specific and you can link what they're saying with the intended changes that you set out to bring about. And the other group that we could or might include would be those who deliver your activities. So if you've got volunteers, assistants, staff members that are delivering things, they often have observations, views, and experiences that can be really helpful and help us understand the impact we're having as well. Some of the changes that you might want to explore with people that might result from the activities are things like changes in how they feel about certain things. So sometimes when we're using sport or physical activity as a vehicle for wider change, that might be something like how they feel about their confidence, how they feel about their connection to others, their relationships with friends, how they feel about their fitness, their well-being, their motivation to go on to participate, for example, in other kinds of sport or physical activity. And it can also be really helpful to think about what's changed for them in terms of their behaviour or the way that they work. So how have they followed up? Have they, been sustaining their activity? Have they gone on to do new things as a result? These can be really nice examples of change that you can prompt people around when you're gathering their views and experiences. So I really wanted to leave you with some questions that you can either freeze this slide and jot things down, or do it afterwards, or do it as a group. But I wanted to leave you with some questions around how you could develop a really strong evaluation plan. There are a number of things I wanted you to think about that link to what I've described already. The first is, what outcomes do you want to focus on in your evaluation? Often people try and gather evidence on everything, and that isn't always useful or appropriate. I would encourage you to have maybe 3 to 5 outcomes that you do some measurement around. That's usually about perfect. And try and have then a few key indicators for each of those. So it's lovely if for a number of the outcomes you have a mixture of number-based and softer information, and have like a couple of different methods for each. That's a really great approach to try and take. If you can get your whole evaluation plan on one page, I would be very happy with that. When it comes to thinking about methods, so the way you'll gather the evidence, I would really like you to try and look at the methods you already have in place. So for example, if you already do a survey of members or participants, or a survey with a school, if you work in a school, if you've got a method like that you could try and add a couple of questions into, that can be a really good approach. Sometimes projects and programs have an outcome-based tool they use with individual people as well to explore, for example, their baseline and end feelings on confidence or physical fitness or whatever it might be. So you might want to look at one of those and add a little question into that rather than creating a whole new method. But when you come to explore new methods, try and look at what might add value. There's a couple of things here. One is you might need to choose new methods to try and reach people that you aren't reaching very well through your existing methodologies. So either people that you want to have deeper or richer conversations with, or people that might face barriers in engaging in methods that you already have. You should also try and have a think about being creative and engaging in the methods that you choose. So we often think of surveys. Many of us do work around case studies, which can be a really powerful way to tell stories. I would encourage you to link those to the outcomes rather than just making them very positive personal stories. So trying to connect with the outcomes that you intended to bring about. But there's lots of other ways that we can gather information from people as well. So you can use art, you can use quite participative methods to get number-based data. So we've seen people do things like have football nets and have people kick the ball into one for yes and the other one for no, things like that. So trying to think really creatively about how you can engage with people. There's lots of information online about how you might do some of that as well. The very last thing I wanted to leave you with is a question really, which is about how can you ensure you hear or amplify the quieter voices? So this links back to this point I made about who you want to engage with. We want to try and get beyond the people that are already quite vocal and loud. So I would encourage you to think about that. Are there partners that don't really engage in conversations with you or give you feedback? They might be people that are interesting to engage with. Are there particular groups, whether it's age groups, geographical communities, people that have some kind of shared characteristic that you've seen that there's a pattern there that maybe they don't engage very well in your evaluation at the moment? So really trying to think about how you hear those people, how you amplify those voices, how you pay attention to them, even if they're not the majority of views. I hope this has been helpful and you can use it as a way to look at what you do already around evaluation and plan something more effective for your programme or project. Thank you.